It was a sight that was destined to haunt her for the rest of her life. A muzzle flash, a puff of smoke, and the shadowy figure of a man holding a rifle, barely visible above the wooden fence at the top of the knoll, still in the very act of murdering the President of the United States. For a stunned second or two after the sound of the shots faded, an eerie, motionless silence gripped the inhabitants of Dealey Plaza. Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess Cannell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription today. We are going through JFK, The Last Dissenting Witness by Bill Sloan with Jean Hill. Now, Jean Hill is the woman, I'll put up the photo here, who was perhaps the closest individual to Jackie when JFK was shot. She was on Jackie's side of the street, across from the grassy knoll. She was there with her friend. We're going to hear all about her story in this book. This copy that I got, you guys, so I live in the Dallas area, and one night my husband and I went for a date night. I'll include a little photo just to show you the stack I found. All of those books were JFK assassination related books, and I wanted all of them, and I narrowed it down to the ones that I knew I could get through on the channel or that I just would personally enjoy, but I wanted all of them. But this particular one was an autographed copy, and so she lived here in this area, and I will just show you, there is her signature. So I feel really fortunate to have this particular copy, but we are going to read through portions of this book together over the next few episodes. I'm not sure how many it will end up being, but let's go ahead and get into it. The front cover notes that there is a foreword by Oliver Stone, and it has this quote from Jim Garrison, who did his own, of course, famous investigation into the case. He says, Jean Hill is the one constant factor in the whole assassination story. She's a genuine patriot, and her story is what America is all about. So that's his assessment of her. Now, Jim Mars, the author of Crossfire, says, considering her proximity as an eyewitness in Dealey Plaza, her insider knowledge of the Dallas police, and her treatment by federal authorities, Jean Hill may well be the most important assassination witness alive today. Her story deserves close scrutiny by every citizen. It says, this is the gripping story of Jean Hill's incredible ordeal, which began when she saw the gunman on the famous grassy knoll fire the shot that exploded the president's skull. That sunny November Dallas day turned into calamity. The country would never forget, and neither would Jean Hill. She also acted as a key consultant on the Oliver Stone film JFK in the early 90s. So this is her book, and we are going to get into it. JFK, The Last Dissenting Witness. This is her portrait in autumn of 1962. This is the young woman just 1 year later who observed the assassination of the president right in front of her. First, we get the foreword. Jean Hill is a pretty terrific lady with a unique perspective on the Kennedy assassination. When you talk to Jean, you get a feeling of rock solidness. She communicates Texas down to her bones, and she also communicates the truth. She's a woman you believe, a woman you can trust. She has given me a bird's eye view of the assassination. I believe her. When we began working on our film about the assassination, Jean told us her story in her colorful colloquial dialect, which I tried to match in the film. She served as a technical advisor for the historic events in Dealey Plaza. She also helped us set the mood and tone and helped catch details of the assassination that few other people know. She told us how her interrogators roughed her up, how angry they were, and that makes me wonder what they could be covering up. Jean is one of the key witnesses to the assassination and an important character in our film. Interestingly, he had her actually play the stenographer taking Jean Hill's testimony in his movie, but because of the interests of time, he had to cut that part from the film. So she would have been in the film. That's very interesting to me and kind of fun. In the preface, it says millions of Americans have seen Jean Hill without ever realizing it. Anyone who views Abraham Zapruder's classic film of the Kennedy assassination is likely to notice her red-clad figure close beside the presidential limousine as the fatal shots strike JFK. Not knowing her name, many who have watched the Zapruder film simply refer to her as the Lady in Red. She has appeared on TV any number of times, and countless readers have come across her photograph or references to her in authoritative books on the assassination. And yet, even today, 28 years after the calamity in Dallas, so this was published in 91, virtually no one really knows who Jean Hill is. Few, beyond a small inner circle of assassination investigators, have any grasp of the long, bitter, traumatizing ordeal through which she has lived. The principal purpose of this book is to tell the rest of Jean Hill's story, the part to which the movie merely alludes. Here, for the first time anywhere, the last surviving assassination eyewitness, openly to dispute the Warren Commission's verdict that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in murdering JFK, reveals the long-kept secrets which federal authorities feared and tried desperately to suppress. Chapter 1, The Shots and the Shooter. It is a bright, crystal clear afternoon in April 1991, but to anyone standing in Dallas's historic Dealey Plaza, it could just as easily be November 1963. In reality, the Texas School Book Depository, from which Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly assassinated the President of the United States, has long been converted into a county office building. Of course, now it is the sixth floor museum is the primary purpose of the building. But through the magic of Hollywood, the structure looming above the intersection of Elm and Houston Streets once more looks just as it did when Oswald supposedly fired his mail-order rifle from its notorious sixth floor window. Above the brown brick facade of the depository, the sky is pale blue and cloudless, as director Oliver Stone and his camera crew pack dozens of actors, extras, and vintage automobiles into one small sunlit corner of the plaza to film a climactic scene for the movie JFK. "Okay, we're rolling," yells an assistant director. "Everybody quiet." In the hush that follows, a bespectacled Dallas grandmother stares in silent awe from a short distance away and watches a simulated motorcade creep toward her. She is Jean Hill, a Dallas schoolteacher who is an integral part of this scene, both the original version and the one now being recreated by Oliver Stone. Flanked by police motorcycles, a long blue Lincoln limousine, identical to the one in which John Fitzgerald Kennedy rode to his death more than 27 years ago, slowly approaches, and Jean is filled with a rising sense of unease. She feels her insides coil into knots as the actor portraying Kennedy waves to the well-wisher extras lining the sidewalk. Despite the coolness of the day, she begins to sweat, and her whole body tenses as she awaits the shots she knows are coming. "It's only a movie," she whispers to herself, vainly trying to control the shaking of her hands. "It's only a movie." As a key consultant and technical advisor to Stone and his production company, Jean realizes full well what she is witnessing is mere make-believe. But despite her attempts to stay calm and self-controlled, she is gripped by the same persuasive, paralyzing fear that has assailed her so many thousands of times before. She closes her eyes, dreading the shots, even though she knows they are only blanks, and struggles against a stifling fear and an irrational desire to run away and hide. "It's only a movie," she keeps reminding herself, and the phrase repeats itself monotonously inside her head. And she finds herself being drawn irresistibly backward through time, back across the years to this identical spot on a long ago autumn noon, back to the day the world will never forget, when her terror first began. It was a bright, crystal clear Indian summer day in Dallas. The sky above the brown brick facade of the Texas School Book Depository was a pale blue and virtually cloudless. On top of the building, the digital Hertz rent-a-car sign alternately flashed a temperature of 66 degrees and a time of 12:25 p.m. It was Friday, November 22nd, 1963, a perfect day for a parade in a city that fancied itself as nearly perfect as any American city could be. Although it was less than a week before Thanksgiving, there was no hint in the air that winter's chill would soon descend, much less that it would be the most painful, soul-wrenching winter that Dallas had ever experienced. Below, in Dealey Plaza, a fan-shaped park-like area where 3 major downtown thoroughfares converge before entering a railroad underpass at the western edge of the central business district, the crowds were smiling and eager. After all, it wasn't every day that you had the chance to see the President of the United States in person during your lunch hour, and downtown office workers had turned out by the thousands to take advantage of that opportunity. Jean Hill and her companion Mary Moorman didn't work downtown, but they had come there anyway, attracted by the prospect of getting a close-up look at the president and taking his picture with Mary's new Polaroid camera. For Jean, an attractive 32-year-old mother of 2 children who had recently separated from her husband, there was an extra added incentive. J.B. Marshall, the Dallas motorcycle patrolman whom she had been dating regularly for the past several weeks, was to be riding on the outside rear wheel of the presidential limousine, not lemonade. A romance had rapidly started to bloom between Jean and the handsome young officer, and her fondest hope at the moment was to be able to catch him in the same photograph with JFK. She wanted JB to see her too. That was the reason she had worn the full-length red raincoat in spite of the sunny skies. There was nothing to be inconspicuous about Jean Hill on this fateful day. To achieve her goals, she and Mary had charmed a young policeman into letting them into the open triangle-shaped area bounded by Main, Elm, and Houston Street, where they now stood. The triangle, which was directly across Elm Street from the spot where the main crowd had gathered in front of the school book depository, was normally off limits to civilians, and Jean and Mary were virtually the only ones occupying it at the moment. It provided an unrestricted vantage point for snapping pictures of the motorcade, and the 2 women had established themselves in an ideal spot, squarely on the curb of Elm Street, where Jean calculated they would be no more than 10 feet from the president's car and JB's motorcycle when they passed. She and Mary had taken turns running back and forth to the other side of the triangle to glance up Main Street toward the advancing motorcade as it drew nearer and nearer. And now the excitement and anticipation of the moment was building to such a fever pitch that Jean could hardly keep still. For Jean Hill, like most of those gathered in the plaza at that precise moment, life seemed pleasant, satisfying, and uncomplicated. In Dallas, a city largely unburdened by the problems besetting many other urban centers, and a community that had long sensed itself favored by divine providence, life in general was good, and almost everybody expected it to keep right on getting better. Although Big D was much larger and far more glamorous than Oklahoma City, where Jean had lived before moving to Dallas in August 1962, the lifestyle here seemed no less simple and easygoing, at least in the circles in which Jean moved. During her brief association with JB, she had become acquainted with many of his fellow motorcycle officers. They were a laid-back lot who were well known throughout the Dallas Police Department for their rakish escapades, and dropping a few of their names and badge numbers had been a key factor in persuading the young cop to let her and Mary go where they wanted to go today. It makes you wonder why the Dallas PD was blocking off that section. We may find out as she describes her experience. The digital sign atop the school book depository said 1228. As little as Jean realized it, at that instant, the good, simple life in Dallas, Texas was destined to last for approximately 2 more minutes. After that, it would never be the same again. Certainly not for any of those happy, excited Dallasites in Dealey Plaza, and least of all for Jean Hill. "Look, Jean!" she heard Mary shout. "Here they come!" Jean turned just as the lead motorcycle, ridden by Officer Len McGuire, another close acquaintance, came roaring around the corner of Main Street and turned onto Houston Street. So that means if in her position, if you picture yourself facing the motorcade, that means it's coming back here and turning onto Houston Street, which she cannot see. It's up the hill from her. where the motorcade would be advancing directly toward that 6th floor window before it turns onto Elm Street. It was closely followed by the first car in the Kennedy motorcade, the one bearing Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry and County Sheriff Bill Decker, which was now moving directly toward Jean and Mary and preparing to turn west again onto Elm Street. Then the long blue open-topped limousine swung into view, so that would be to her right, coming down the hill, flanked by 4 motorcycles, its flags fluttering in the slight breeze. Jean could see someone waving from inside the car, but as yet the figures were blurred and indistinct. As the limo rounded the corner, Jean noticed dozens of excited people pouring out of Main Street, ignoring the police lines and spilling now into the triangular area which she and Mary had had to themselves until now. So Main Street was back over here. Like I said, the car had come down Houston toward the 6th floor depository building, or toward the depository building, and was going to come down in front of her. But back over there at that corner, all the people from Main Street are now coming this way. They just had such a good time watching the president, and they're coming past the barriers into the triangle grassy area where she is standing. She was acutely aware of their presence behind her as they charged toward the spot where she and Mary stood. "Get started, Mary," Jean yelled impatiently. "Let's get some pictures." Mary raised the Polaroid and snapped a series of photos as the big Lincoln started down the slight incline into Dealey Plaza. As the fresh prints slid from the camera, Jean grabbed them quickly to peel away the paper coverings and brush them with fixative. As she completed this process, she shoved the pictures into the pocket of her long red coat, scarcely taking time even to glance at them. She would have plenty of time to look at them later, she told herself, but she was wrong. As nearly as Jean remembers today, Mary clicked off 4 or 5 photos as the limousine rolled toward them. Then, suddenly, the car was virtually on top of them, and Jean could see every occupant with amazing clarity. She saw a tight-lipped Secret Serviceman, Texas Governor John Connally, with one hand raised, Mrs. Connally turning to say something to the president, Jackie Kennedy in a flash of pink, glancing down at something in her lap. None of them looked to be more than a dozen arms lengths away. Just behind the limo and to her right, she could see JB in his white ostrich egg helmet, coaxing his rumbling cycle forward. In another second or two, it was going to be absolutely perfect. Remember, she has her focus on, I'm going to get a photo of the two of them. But as luck would have it, JFK himself was facing in the wrong direction, his attention totally occupied, it seems, by the throngs in front of the schoolbook depository, so across the way. So from her position, the schoolbook depository was up the hill to the right, so she sees him looking that direction. This would never do, Jean thought. She had to do something to make him turn around. "Hey, Mr. President," Jean shouted impulsively when the car was almost abreast of her. "Look over here. We want to take your picture." In her desperation and excitement, she stepped off the curb into the street as she spoke, almost touching the front fender of the limousine before she instinctively drew back. An inner voice seemed to be admonishing her, "No, don't get too close. They won't like it if you get too close." Whether Kennedy heard her or not is uncertain, but at that moment he turned in Jean's direction. He seemed to smile directly at her, and he waved. What a great picture this is going to be, Jean thought, as Mary raised her camera. She sighted through the viewfinder and crack! Almost simultaneously, Jean heard a shot. Mary hesitated as an expression of pain and confusion crossed the president's face. His hands jerked convulsively toward his throat. Crack! Jean saw the president driven backward and sideways as a second shot struck him with tremendous force. The whole back of his head appeared to explode, and a cloud of blood-red mist filled the air and spattered down on the windshield of JB's motorcycle. Approximately an eighth of a second later, as investigators would later determine, as the president was falling toward his wife, Mary clicked the shutter of the Polaroid. Then Jean heard Jackie Kennedy's anguished cry, "My God, they've shot my husband!" Within the space of a single split second, Jean visually absorbed all of this, and the stark, sudden horror of the scene etched itself into her memory for all time to come. But within that same split second, her focus shifted to the area beyond the car, across Elm Street. So that would be directly across from her, slightly to the left now, but basically where the car is. In that same trajectory, just looking up the hill, she saw something else, something even more unforgettably horrifying. "Jean, get down!" Mary screamed as she and the other panicked bystanders nearly threw themselves to the ground. But although she was every bit as convinced as Mary that they were directly in the line of fire, Jean stood there, immobilized by the shock of what she had seen, while her friend tugged desperately at her legs. On the other side of the street, at the top of a little green mound, universally known today as the Grassy Knoll, Jean Hill had seen an incredible sight, one that no one else among the handful who shared her vantage point that day could see, because all the others were sprawled face down on the ground, and she was transfixed by it. It was a sight that was destined to haunt her for the rest of her life. A muzzle flash, a puff of smoke, and the shadowy figure of a man holding a rifle, barely visible above the wooden fence at the top of the knoll, still in the very act of murdering the President of the United States. For a stunned second or two after the sound of the shots faded, an eerie, motionless silence gripped the inhabitants of Dealey Plaza. During this fleeting, shell-shocked interval, Jean detected an abrupt flurry of movement to her right, and her eyes darted in that direction, fixing themselves on a point at ground level near the schoolbook depository. Someone was running. A lone man in a brown coat was running as hard as he could go, past the frozen, motionless figures of the stricken onlookers, straight toward the position of the shadowy gunman holding the rifle. Jean watched him run from a point near the west wall of the schoolbook depository until he was almost to the near end of the wooden fence in front of her. Then he was lost in a sea of confusion as the crowd's momentary mass paralysis dissolved and everyone suddenly started shouting, pointing, ducking, and scrambling for cover. As though in a dream, Jean watched her friend, JB, turning his motorcycle around and around in tight circles, staring upward, his hand instinctively clutching at his service revolver. She tried urgently to get his attention. "JB," she cried, "it's me, Jean." There was no reaction from the officer. He gunned his roaring cycle, his eyes scanning the tops of nearby buildings, obviously searching for snipers and oblivious to her presence. Bobby Hargis, the motorcycle officer riding beside Marshall and nearest the limousine, wiped at the blood and brain tissue that covered his face and helmet, half blinding him. He jumped off his cycle and stumbled up the hill at a crouch, drawing his pistol as he went. Then, just as the limousine began speeding away with the mortally wounded president, something inside Jean Hill snapped, and she was suddenly running too. Now, I will say, hold on. There's some wonky timing here. The limousine had to have already begun speeding away because the motorcycles are spinning like this, and she's seeing someone run from the building. So her memory is jumbling, or they're taking us back to that moment. But whatever's happening, I just want to point out that the timing is a bit wonky here. She was suddenly running too. She raced directly across the street, narrowly avoiding being hit by JB's still circling motorcycle, and up the grassy knoll toward the fence where the shadow with the gun had been only an instant earlier. She would later recall her own behavior with bewilderment and amazement, unable to offer any rational explanation for what made her decide to charge the position of an armed and ruthless killer. Interesting, this actually reminds me of the same bewilderment and amazement that Jackie Kennedy felt when she saw the video and footage of her on top of the car. She said she did not remember getting on top of the car, and she couldn't offer any explanation for what she was doing. Clint Hill thought she was trying to reach for brain matter and bone of her husband. Some people wrongly thought she was trying to escape the car, like to just get away from the horror of it. Her own actions, even in that moment of shock, don't match with that, because her goal was hold his head together. Her goal was be with him. So it fits that she was retrieving a piece of bone matter. But that same shock, bewilderment, amazement, unable to offer a rational explanation reminds me of this, that the things we do when we are in shock don't always make sense even to ourselves. We're like, what was I thinking? I'm just a lady. Why am I running towards a ruthless killer? That doesn't make sense. All I knew was that I had seen this man shoot the president right before my very eyes, she says, and I had to stop him. That was the only thing I was thinking about right then. But by now, the entire area was one gigantic melee of confusion and hysteria, and Jean had to fight and claw her way through throngs of panicked, weeping, cursing, babbling people to get to the fence. We're going to stop there for today's readings. I hope this interests you. We will be back with frequent short reads from this book. Like I said, we will not be reading all of this book, but we are going to read the relevant sections that give us her perspective on that day. So I hope you enjoyed this. JFK's The Last Dissenting Witness with Jean Hill, from her experience from waiting for the motorcade, observing the shots, and then running up the hill to get to the fence. So next time we will come back to this exact spot. Now, what stands out to you? We talked about the timing difference, right? I would say too, there's like some insertion of new explanations for behaviors into the old, which of course we're going to get in any telling like this. But let me know what you notice about Jean Hill. Let me know what questions you are bringing to this text, and next time we will meet her back at the fence. You guys have a great day. Bye.